On this episode of The Badge and Beyond, we may be discussing domestic violence, mental health issues, suicide, and self-harm.
If you would like support and someone to talk to, the right avenues in your local area would be appreciated for you to have a look at those options. Please make use of avenues such as Lifeline on 13 11 14 and also for domestic violence hotline 1-800-RESPECT. So viewer and listening discretion is advised. Welcome everyone to The Badge and Beyond. Today I think we'll discuss interesting behaviours of perpetrators and what we've seen inside the cops and then how we've taken that to what we do now. I think one of the interesting things that people find is that when police are actually looking for patterns of behaviour that determine a particular kind of personality, particular kind of modus operandi, and it basically gets the investigator on a trail. Mm-hmm. So would you like to share with us something you came across in that vein?
Look, I think, as you know, I've got a bit of a passion around psychology. I think to be a good detective, and especially for what you were doing as well with source management, was you have to understand people, you have to understand the psyche of people, and you kind of have to go a little bit deeper than just general law enforcement basics. But there are those times in the police force where you come across a problem that the legislation and the policy and procedures and resourcing just don't allow you to attend to appropriately.
Yep.
And look, it's an interesting phenomenon. I don't know if you've come across it, you probably have. I've seen it a couple of times, not a lot, but I've seen it a couple of times where in this particular instance I'll talk about is not unheard of, and that is seemingly normal male gets to a certain age and they go a bit funny. Now that can be sometimes, we hear about the cantankerous old man and things like that, and guys becoming antisocial, and some women for that matter as well. But this particular example is really interesting because I was working in the detective's office at Maroubra, and we got a call about a guy. He just kept showing up on the local crime reports, and this guy was in a well-to-do suburb in the command, but he was probably in his 60s, mid-60s, still quite healthy and everything else, recently retired, but his wife had died. And since his wife had died, probably within, they say, 6 to 12 months of that happening, this guy had changed. And so we're getting all these sort of calls, and I'll explain what they are. Right? When I basically got asked by the crime manager to look into this guy. Let's see what's going on down here, because we're getting all these calls for a crime hotspot that we didn't really have. So I start going down and talking to different residents, and they all point to this one guy, and they say, look, he and his wife seem to be in this committed, loving relationship, just normal individuals, reaching the golden years of their life, and as they were about to retire, she dies, and he's just gone off the rails. And when I say gone off the rails, he's like, he's got a different sex worker in there every night, he's having sex parties, he's wandering around outside naked, he's abusing the neighbours for nothing. Like, there's neighbours have previously got along with him, he's cantankerous, he's yelling and screaming, they think he's doing drugs, he's damaging cars, he's approaching kids in the street, riding their bike, but not just telling them to get off the street, he's like being very sexualised towards them and things like this. But the problem we came up with, the damage to the cars, we couldn't prove it was him. And he was always on the cusp of doing the wrong thing with the kids, but there's an element in the police force where you consider, I can go after the guy, but what's the trauma of the court process going to do to the child, especially when court is quite daunting for children, and the ability for them to give evidence is really hard.
Yeah.
And so here's this guy that's like an absolute menace, seemingly a normal guy, but he's got a screw loose now or something's happened to him. But his behaviour's got to be managed as best as possible for the safety of the community. And it was at a point where people were trying to sell their house, and he was doing all this weird and wonderful stuff whilst open homes are going on and the auctions and things. So I'm going to go back and we start roundtable it a little bit, but there's nothing we can do. So the only thing I can do is kind of, we would call it in the D's, to bounce someone. And to bounce someone means to go and talk to them, but really to get a result. So that might be to, if you roll someone in the detectives, that means you're getting them to give evidence against one of their co-offenders or someone close to them.
Yes, you're not robbing them for the shoes.
Yes, that's when someone gets rolled. If you bounce someone, it means you go and have a very stern word to them. So I grabbed one of the other big guys in the office, turned up unannounced, and the good thing is the guy I knew he was staunch. He was good for just standing behind there and like very stoic looking, staring someone down and nodding his head. And we just turn up at this guy's place, and of course, as you'd expect, this guy opens the door like Hugh Hefner with his red dressing gown on at like midday, wearing budgie smugglers, and he's kind of like into me. I'm like, we need to talk. We're going to step inside and have a chat. And in that conversation, I politely referred him to the fact that, first of all, we were on to him. Second of all, if those things continued, the path he would end up on would be the sex offenders register. And I was a very tenacious investigator, and I would stop at nothing to convict him for an offence he had committed. And he might want to reconsider his actions. Now, he left. I left the command a couple of months after that, but within that time, we didn't hear anything from him.
Yeah.
But that, to me, is a point of reference where the police just don't have the right resources or the ability to be able to manage that situation. There's no SOPs to do that in the cops. You're really hoping that a conversation with that individual, a warning, so to speak, is going to have fruit.
Yeah, you've done what we call a disruption technique.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. It's about that would need sort of meticulous surveillance and ongoing observation and just seeing what he's doing, following his behaviours. But you knew that where it was going to lead, so that when you don't have the options, nipping it in the bud, so to speak, is the best thing you can do. And who knows how many people you spared from becoming victims from people like that. And that's the thing, right? With it's not like a movie where the investigators have this, numerous resources, almost endless supply of support, and it's just that one job that the whole office gets to do. Doesn't happen in the real world. I remember when we had, I was in a plainclothes proactive team, and there was probably about 6 of us in this little squad, and they're amazing workers. They all became really, really great cops, and I was fortunate enough to be with them sort of at that time, and I was a bit senior to them, so I had the pleasure of being their team leader for a little while. And we got a report of a schoolgirl that had felt like she was being followed by this guy. And I was a parent. 2 of the other people in the team were parents too, and so like that always struck a nerve with us. And so I was like, I'll take this job. They were more about, can a police car just drive up and down? And I'm like, let's look a bit beyond that. So we decided that we would find out what we could and put together a plan. So I remember I went through some Crime Stoppers reports, see anything that we'd had. I've spoken to the intelligence department on anything to do with that area that was anything like this before. And I was lucky, I had a really tenacious intel team. They were very good back in those days at Bankstown. And the analyst just took it and ran with it. And he just started to build up a bit of a history for what's been happening. And so then when you're cross-referencing it with any sort of people on the Child Protection Register, are there people that are known for those kind of offences? And this would be normally something the detectives would handle, kind of thing. Our detectives were very busy with all kinds of stuff. And they were very happy that we were deciding to take this on, put it that way. But we were more than happy, like we were equal to the challenge, I would say. So we started to sort of do our homework, and then we ran sort of covert surveillance every time after school and before school on the approach and on. So then we didn't let the school kid know anything at the beginning until we started to get a bit more sort of meat in the brief, and then because I didn't want to sort of use her as bait without her consent, if that makes sense. So we brought the family in, had a conversation. Look, this is where we are. There's going to be plenty of us. He's not going to have a chance to get anywhere near her, but I also need proof that he's actually following her. Because at the moment I have, it's kind of hearsay. We don't know. And he may not be following her.
That's
just
right.
some random bloke happened to be going the same way she was going. So we had 3 follows, and he was definitely following her.
Yeah.
Right? So we follow him back home, and he lives not far, and we thought we'd have to be close by. So we needed to get access to him, so to speak. So I decided that we would do some canvassing for a break and enter in that street. So canvassing, as you would know, if you're in the job, is basically we're knocking on doors of the neighbours to find out if anyone heard or saw anything. And I created a fictitious situation where a neighbour had been broken into, and the offenders kind of were seen and they were dressed a certain way. So what I needed to do was knock on doors all the way before this guy's house, all the way after this guy's house, and opposite. So he just saw this police presence, uniform presence, knocking on doors, so that he didn't feel like he was singled out.
Yeah.
Now, I have a weak bladder, right? So the house, and well, that was the story. So when I knocked on his house with my offsider, the plan was to give the detective something to get us a search warrant. Get a good look at this guy, with any luck be invited into his house.
Yes. Yeah.
So because of my weak bladder, I needed to go use the facilities in his home. And he was more than obliging, which is another key thing, right? He was really overdoing how cooperative he was in helping police.
Yep.
And, you know, the guilty mind kind of overcompensating. And so my offsider knew the drill. You know, he'd been working this job with me. And so he kept him busy while I went inside and did what I had to do. And what I found was disturbing in his home. I won't give too much of it because I don't want to compromise anything or come back and bite me. But we had the right guy. You know, we had the evidence, and it proved this person was unfortunately had a fetish for children, and had taken some photographs, and it was enough for me to give the detectives what they needed to get that search warrant.
Yep. And look, I'm just for the legal eagles out there that'll jump in the comments. We're not stupid. You know, you don't go into those covert approaches without understanding the law and the legislation of how you're gathering evidence. So Danny's not in there kind of like CSI style, NCIS, whatever, snooping through cupboards, you know, trying to get that kind of thing, hacking into a laptop. It's stuff that is open and present and easily seen without having to
disturb anything
or go outside the bounds of where he would normally be going. And he's been given consent to come in and use the toilet, so he's on the way to the bathroom to do that.
Absolutely. And the point is, and I'm glad you said that, because at the end of the day, how you take the evidence is crucial.
Yes.
Right. And again, for that search warrant, we knew that a judge was going to be looking at this, on how this evidence was achieved. So I had some very good, robust discussions with the detectives before we went in to do this. But them and the prosecutor were very happy with how it was done. I was quite proud of it. I just don't want to give up police methodology or my methodology because I can use it again. So, so we were able to get this stuff, and what was really rewarding was getting to do one more follow of this guy, but now having the ability to arrest him. And that was really entertaining.
Yeah.
You know, jumping out of an unmarked van and grabbing him was a lot of fun as he got close enough to the girl and reached out for her. And it just kind of shows you, like, these people live among us. You know, you've got to pick up on those kind of trends. So now that, you know, we're both out of the job and, you know, we get to run our own investigations firm, what's been great is harnessing that same skill set, but being allowed to be more creative. Because
Oh, yeah.
now we don't have the bureaucracy on top of us. We don't have all the red tape and all the rubbish that stops you from doing things. And I feel like, especially with you, it's given you the chance to really hone in and be able to, number one, identify when we've got, like a stalker case. And number two, to be able to actually effectively not only disrupt, but actually get some results for the victim in this space.
Yeah. This episode of the Badge and Beyond podcast is brought to you through the sponsorship of
IC Technology. You can find them on ictechnology.com.au for all things IT and cyber.
and Precision Integrity Services, who you can find at privateinvestigatorsydney.com.au. Yeah, look, and I think that's one of the things I think myself, you, the whole team, we really enjoy doing some of those working in those areas where it's fixated persons and stalkers, because there's an element, it's very multi-dimensional. I mean, for me, I really enjoy this space because, I've done that postgraduate work in forensic psych. I've done some of the different courses coming out of the States on contemporary threat management. And that deals with everything from kind of fixated persons through to people on the path of intended violence. So, where you see workplace shootings and school shootings and things in the States, it's this whole program and methodology that we utilise has been developed to prevent people from progressing down that path further. And I think it's so all-encompassing for a victim of a stalker or someone on the path of intended violence that they don't know where to turn. Oftentimes they're going to the police and not getting a result because the police almost have to wait till there's an offence committed that they can identify is attached to that person to then lock them up. And then oftentimes they get bail or they get off and they keep doing it. So for us, it brings to mind a recent matter we had where we had a young professional female come to us and look very highly educated, good person in the community, and said, look, I know this sounds crazy, but I think I'm being stalked by someone. And, we always start our process with a consult, and Danny and I sat down with her, and she just started laying out these things. And honestly, what she was talking about, it was a point where you could see how it started. And she'd met a guy online, and then she said he started out kind of relatively normal, and then the slippery slope started to the point that, he was coming and going. You had all these different phone numbers. There was an element of this guy had her thinking he was like a James Bond, Jason Bourne kind of individual. And look, Danny and I have had some experience with different intelligence agencies interacting with them for law enforcement purposes. And there's just certain things that don't ring true. No one tells you if they do that stuff. That's one of the things is they never tell you, right? They have a good backstory. And they would not compromise that to someone they met online, even for many years. So all of that kind of stuff didn't ring true, but here's a guy that's like tracking where she's going, finding like any male that she has contact with, kind of threatening and harassing them and interacting with them as multiple different personalities and making threats towards them. So she becomes more isolated over time. And so what we were able to do was, first of all, she got to the end of that consult and we ran through during the consult. I think the best thing for her was we could predict things before she even said them. So we were like, he does this, right? And she's like, yes. And then you would have found he did this. And she's like, how did you know? I was like, that's kind of that offender's playbook. We know how that offender's going to develop. But then we were able to run through our system with her, and she said at the end, she said, look, it was just amazing to have someone believe me because I felt like I was crazy. But, here's a guy that did all that kind of harassment, was violent towards her, was tracking her, was recording her in different things. So we set up We did background checks to know exactly who we were dealing with, put together a profile, did a bug sweep of the house, which was clear, except for the camera she didn't tell us she had in there, which we found, which was good.
Yeah. Shows the equipment works.
Yeah, at least proved to her that we weren't using $20 eBay gear. And, you know, I still feel like that was a test. She said she forgot, but I feel like we were being tested. But then we're able to put a security network in place for her and make her home feel safe.
Yeah.
And once we've been able to create that background check and know who we're dealing with and make her safe, and making her safe is not just about CCTV, it's not just about a better door lock, it's about strategies you put in place. It's about educating that person on anti-surveillance techniques and what is an offence and what isn't, and how to manage the increasing behaviours and where that's going to go, and so what to expect and how to react to that appropriately or in a proactive manner. And then from that, with those security measures and getting those strategies in place, we're able to get the evidence to put this guy before the police. And then, even then with the police, it was a little bit of a struggle at times, but they did a good job. AVO got put in place. The police are looking at charges for those matters. But since the AVO and since the fact that everything's been brought to bear on him, the tables have turned and he's stopped.
Yeah.
And that's the key thing, creating that line in the sand where the behaviour stops and that person can get on with their lives. Now, the thing is, this lady and her story is not uncommon. I mean, we've seen the James Bond, Jason Bourne persona a number of times. It's not an uncommon strategy that these offenders like to use.
Yeah.
We've seen any number of different strategies in personas employed, but it's out there and it's happening, and you can't just go to Google and type in who do I deal with, who do I go to when I've got a stalker, or how to identify a stalker and what do I do. It's just not really there, and I think that's one of the reasons why we love that work, because we get to help people that were otherwise lost.
Yeah, and I think with these, I call them vermin, once you expose them, you know, they're exposed to that lie, they shy away and run back into the dredges of dungeons of where they came from. And what's been great in our corporate adventures is that we can be creative and put together the strategy that will not just disrupt, it'll actually solve the problem.
That's right.
You know, and I think the problem is we're in a society where we think can we hide behind an AVO or all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, I mean, someone who's trying to find you or trying to follow you and do these different things, they can be quite dangerous people. And sometimes it's not about the reality of their capabilities, it's the perception. And these guys, and I'll say guys because usually the preponderance is male, but there definitely have been female offenders in this. But with these kind of offenders that we come across, they just want to instill that fear installment plan.
Yep, that's right.
Just compounding with interest daily. That's how they
in your head rent free.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. That's how they work.
Yeah.
And so when we untangle that and get to see the victim get her power back, it's a big thing for us, you know. So understanding that the strategy of these sort of narcissistic offenders is to just implant themselves to think that they're always watching you. Yeah. They're omnipotent, they're omnipresent. 100%. You know, they've got that sort of, and even though to us, that's not happening.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because for you it is happening.
That's right.
You know, so that's the thing where I feel sometimes, whether it's law enforcement or whether it's any kind of practitioner in that space, you got to remove yourself from what you believe it is and understand that your victim's perception is real for them.
Yes.
You know, and so you have to unpack that and you have to remove that fear if you're going to be any good at what you're doing.
And look, what we've got to remember too for, you know, the members of society out there that might be dealing with this, for those that are hearing these stories, is this is not something that they don't just start stalking overnight. The plan's been there before they got engaged with their victim, but they create this over a period of time, and sometimes some of them are really fast, right? Some of them are within a week, 2 weeks, but some of these guys are playing a long game, and it's 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, but the problem is when you try to shut them out or do something about it, you have to be very aware that they've got a strategy played out and they don't want to lose because they put in all this work beforehand. And to these guys, it is a lot of work. Some of these guys live and breathe this. So you have to make sure that you have strategies in place to prevent anything going wrong. And honestly, it's not easy. Everything's new and different. We are always talking about amongst ourselves the risks involved and how this would play out and where the shortcomings might be. But you have to be prepared for it to escalate and how to mitigate and manage that.
And I think for us, it's good to be on the cusp of technology and what's being employed these days, because you can do a lot in the tech space now to follow someone, to listen in on someone, but also to pretend you are, right? And again, then the people have that mistaken belief that their phones are tapped. There's someone listening to them, they're watching them. There's super microphones out there listening in, and for a lot of these victims, they're not believed. And that can be really devastating for a genuine case.
And that's the gaslighting of the offender.
Yeah.
And that's how the victim is further isolated, because when they go with these ideas that seem completely legitimate to them, to a law enforcement agency or someone to support them, they sound a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
And that's usually that's part of the plan of the offender.
And I remember for this particular case that you're talking about, especially you and I were very disturbed with the escalation in behaviour. Like, we were like, this guy, if he doesn't get stopped, he will take this to really high levels.
Yes.
We really did have concerns for the victim's safety in that space, and it wasn't just about getting an AVO or whatever needed to be done. This guy needs to know that we've called his bluff, and our victim has got power.
Yes.
And that's the biggest thing you can do in that space, and whether it's domestic violence or it's personal violence, the perception of fear is something very tangible.
Yeah, look, I think knowing, first of all, for the victim to know that they've got a team behind them to support them is really powerful.
Yeah.
But more than that, for the offender to know that the person they've tried to isolate and they're trying to control is now backed by a team of professionals, that's so powerful, because they know they can't manipulate the team behind them. They know that we've seen their strategies before, we understand their next move. Like a chess game, we've already played it out to the end and all the different options, and we've accounted for their next move. And that's the thing that really helps break the cycle, is them knowing that they just can't control that one person anymore.
Yeah, and if you look at, there's a lot of studies and research into domestic violence and the wheel of violence and the different options that are used and the different tactics. For me, as this has been my space for a long time, even when I deliver training or lecture to students that are doing domestic violence part of the university studies, I always focus on the tactic of isolation. Because when the offender is using isolation tactics, he is effectively detaching you from your support networks and from people that know him for who he is, or she for who she is. And when we're doing that in our work, when we're seeing the sort of systematic attack of all our clients' support networks, that's what becomes really scary. Because then who's she going to go to? Whoever she's going to go to now has already either been scared off,
yes,
right, or alienated from her. And so, we have to fill that void and become, no. There's a team of highly trained people here now that are in your team. And that's sort of the way it's got to play. And even for those frontline workers that we do training for in DV, giving them those extra skills in looking into how an offender uses isolation tactics and then how to counter that. Because once the veil is lifted on the tactics, you can't use it anymore.
No, that's right. And overall, it's that point of just coming back to them, showing we care, we understand, and they're believed.
Yeah.
And once we do that, I think just giving that power back to the victim. is so important. But also across the board, knowing sometimes it's the strangest thing, but we know the key words that help police notice. You know, police are it's a job they've got to get through this, and then they've got to get to the next job. And like all of us in different professions, we've got keywords we're kind of looking out for.
Yep.
And sometimes you just need to know the right thing to say to the police to help them get your case over the line. And that's, you know, part of the strategy. We don't tell anyone to make things up, but oftentimes we get people talk to us, they talk about the little things, and you're like, okay, but then they'll brush off the fact that they've been assaulted or this has happened. You're like, okay, don't go to the police and tell them about this little thing where you felt like maybe you were followed but you weren't. But you might want to tell them about the time they assaulted you, the time they messaged you with a threat that they were going to kill you and your kids and whatever else. That's the important thing to focus on. And if you're not a professional, you don't know.
Yeah, well, that's what our job. Our job is to demist the victim fog. You know, that's what it is. Because they're sitting there and there's all these things that have happened and there's all this trauma, but we can look at it objectively and go, okay, hold on.
Yes.
We know this is where the elements of the offence are going to be, and they need to be relayed properly so that there's a lot of clarity about what's happened here, and we can show that escalation of behaviours that will get you over the line, for example, to initiate a solid police response. But again, like anyone who is experiencing anything like this should definitely reach out to the appropriate authorities in their area and make themselves known, because these things can escalate quite badly.
Absolutely.
So if they want to find us, Anthony, where do they find us?
privateinvestigatorsydney.com.au. And look, even if you're from outside of New South Wales, you can still get in touch with us. We can always put you in touch with a service closer to you. And look, there's a lot of online resources for domestic violence and, policing, etc. If you don't know where to go, feel free to reach out. We're always happy to help.
Thank you for listening to The Badge and Beyond. As always, please reach out to us on Instagram or leave a comment on YouTube if there's anything you'd like us to particularly focus on. Thank you.
Whenever you guys are
Cool.
Cut it now.
Welcome everyone to The Badge and Beyond.
Yes, welcome.
Anthony's ready for you.
I am ready. Are you ready?
I'm born ready.
You were born ready.
I was
That's
born
a
ready.
crap name. Why did your parents do
came
that
out
to you?
running? Oh, we'll start again.